Hey Phil, this is Cameron.
Hey, what's up, Cam?
Man, I gotta talk to you about something. Have you been watching the news?
Dude, what is going on? What's up, everybody? I'm Phil.
And I'm Cameron.
Two Navy vets, just here to talk politics.
And we're here with some differing views, but we're here to have a civil and a healthy discussion.
Thanks for tuning in to Pocket Politics. All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 2 of Pocket Politics. Cam, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Phil. How are you?
Fantastic. So I think, for this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about Tuesday. That can't go unreported. And then do some more Supreme Court stuff because, man, they are on a roll, are they not?
There is plenty to talk about with the Supreme Court. Well, actually, there's plenty to talk about with January 6th as well. I'd also like to get in some discussion today on some governor's races. Kind of keeping with the theme, I guess, last week we had a discussion on some Senate races. And this week I've talked a little bit on some governor races, some key governor races that are out there that I think will be interesting to the listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's worth mentioning. And even though I'm no longer I have not been a Kansas resident and I'm no longer a Texas resident, that's worth talking about because I think Kansas's race is particularly interesting. So we'll get into that. But first, the emergency hearing. So, I haven't been doing this for too long, but the fact that they called everybody back from their July 4th recess is crazy, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, that made for some kind of interesting suspense, I guess, too, is that everybody was sitting there the day before like, wait, what's about to happen? That in and of itself kind of piqued some interest, I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, they don't, to call everybody back from recess, maybe it's happened when the government was shut down or something, but I don't know that that's like a normal thing, right? Because they were already on recess and they said, wait, no, we've got some stuff that has to be handled. And I think the urgency was mainly because this girl, Cassidy Hutchinson, her life was in danger, right? That's why they had to get it out, because she was like...
It seemed to be, yeah.
She's like personally threatened,
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think, well, if you're testifying in this January 6th thing right now, you're coming out to speak or whatever, I think there's just a risk with doing that, period.
Yeah.
Obviously, depending on who you are, where you're at in the whole grand scheme of things, right, the risk could be greater, I suppose, but... certainly it certainly took some courage for her to get out there and do it, and there's no doubt she's taking backlash like she has never seen before.
For essentially telling the truth.
Coming forward and doing what she felt was the right thing to do.
Yeah. Which is crazy. I will say, I think that before we get into the nuts and bolts of it, I really like the West Wing map, like the display they did when they showed. What did you know what I'm talking about? They had that breakdown of where the offices were, and
Yep.
I thought that was really cool because that's not anything like I've taken a tour of the White House, but you don't get to see any of that stuff.
No, that just kind of helps, I guess, paint the picture, so to speak, and lets you in on stuff that your average person does not really know about. It gives you some familiarization, kind of like reading a book and seeing a map, at the beginning of a book. For those that read books anymore, I don't know, it seems like not many of us do.
Yeah, it's like the old, when I was a kid and I read Lord of the Rings, but they have the map, of
yeah.
or some Game of Thrones,
Yeah.
That is pretty cool, but I liked it. I thought it was cool because nobody really sees that stuff, and it's so done. It's done so differently in TV and everything. It's like you always picture this long hallway, and she's like, "Oh no, it takes about 10 seconds to get to the Oval Office,"
Yeah.
and describing that layout because you don't get to see that stuff. And even when you look at a picture of the White House, you don't see the West Wing.
No.
So it you can look at pictures of the White House, and it doesn't even look like the West Wing exists. So I thought that was really good. And I think that just goes to show the level of quality that the committee is putting into this, is that they really want not only to get the truth out there, but they want the public to see the behind the scenes and how problematic this issue was, and they can do it by showing us things like that, like a stupid, graphic of the layout of the White House.
Oh, there's no doubt there's a ton of time going into this. I spoke to that last week. I said they are putting in, the amount of work that this committee has put in, it is tremendous.
Yeah.
And I think it's just, well, and so much of it is behind the scenes, right? I mean, we see what we see on television. We see the committee members doing the questioning, etc. But like the actual behind the scenes work has got to be mind-boggling.
Yeah. I will tell you, I thought there were two things that were quoted in there that I think are the two biggest bombshells. I know you had mentioned to me previously about him trying to get to the Capitol and taking control of the vehicle. However exaggerated that is, because it is, it's like now we're getting that third hand, right? Because it's like Cassidy reported about somebody else telling her that. So it's third hand. So it is what it is. But I think first, the big thing is like Trump quoted, at the ellipse saying, "They're not here to hurt me. Take the fucking mags away." Talking about the magnetic,
right,
sensors like that.
The sensors.
He's like they're not here to,
Well, they're not here to hurt me.
Yeah, they're not here to hurt me. They're not here to fly the plane into the Twin Towers. So take the TSA away, kind of thing. I thought that was huge. I mean, that just goes to show he was trying to get armed people in there, and it also attests to the fact that because there were so many people that weren't entering the Ellipse official event area,
right?
So many people that actually did have weapons.
From what it sounds like, there were a ton of people that had weapons.
Yeah, which is pretty, one, it's illegal in Washington, D.C., right? And two, scary to think about the fact that had this gone just a little bit further, it could have been literally a Fort Sumter.
I mean, and, certainly you hear something like that, it's powerful, right? You hear about, as I heard it the other day when I was listening to it, well, they're not here to hurt me. And of course, all the commentators were talking about, well, then who are they? Who did you believe they were there to hurt? They've got weapons for a reason. And so, yeah, big statement that was out there. Certainly a big statement. I mean, I thought, going back to the whole trying to get to the Capitol, and at one point you heard her testifying. I think it was Cipollone to her. Mm-hmm. I think it was Cipollone to her when he said, "Do not, whatever you do not let," I say her being Cassidy Hutchinson, "whatever you do not let him get to the Capitol. We will be charged with every crime imaginable."
Yes.
So, and I heard that, and my thoughts were, as I was listening to that, can you imagine what it would have looked like on television? Well, or certainly live, but let's just say television. I say live in person, but certainly television. If we would have seen that procession heading for the Capitol, and the President of the United States would have been in front of them leading them.
Yeah, I guess I hadn't really, taken the time to think about exactly. I mean, I had the mental idea of what happens if he's standing up there on, it's his inauguration or something, and he's up there, with the megaphone or something,
up above, like on a stone wall out front where they were, as they were trying to get into the Capitol.
Yeah, but it's a pretty scary thought when you think about it.
I mean, I just started thinking that, right? Imagine him at the head of that procession. Or it doesn't even have to be at the head. I guess he can be in the center of
out
it,
of breath, trying to walk up the stairs,
As he's leading, he's pointing with his arm,
yeah,
gesturing
well,
them
even
through.
Crazier to think about, what do you do if you're a Secret Service agent?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's, nuts, Granted, the people weren't attacking him, but if you're a Secret Service agent, are you not, questioning, what you're doing? At that moment,
as you're following him
as
to the Capitol.
Yeah, you're basically following him into the Capitol. Yeah, it's crazy. And I do want to highlight, I know you may have wanted to talk about this too, but the biggest takeaway for me on the whole him grabbing the driver of the car or something like that is again, I'm skeptical to believe that's fully true. because it's like, shouldn't there be like bulletproof glass in between the driver and the president or something? You know, it just seems like he's in a limo.
I mean, you would think, although I mean, I don't typically ride in that limo, so I can't
Yeah,
speak
I've
to how
never
it
been
looks
inside of it.
there.
Yeah, but the other thing is that if it is true, like that he tried to like take control and then like some like lawyer or like aide was able to like stop him and shut him down, like that just reaffirms how much of a coward the dude was, right? He was like, I'm gonna pretend to be really adamant about this for a second, and then when somebody jerks my arm back, I'm gonna stop and sit back in my spot. Like, you're the president.
Well,
Like, what a fucking coward. I mean,
I think what I heard that coming out of that was, that he had supposedly tried, and again, like you said a couple minutes ago, we're hearing this third, fourth hand, whatever by this point, but his arm tried to lunge forward to go for the steering wheel, supposedly. Someone knocked it away, I forget who they said it was, and then the other piece was that he got just very, very angry that no one was letting him go to the Capitol.
yeah, but isn't that the whole principle of like his entire 4 years in office was that he was a giant coward, right? He would always say, "Oh, they're coming after me, like it's a witch hunt, they're all out to get me." But I was like, "But dude, you're the president." Like, dude, if you were walking around telling people that the vote, if you lost the election, the vote was going to be corrupted, right? Like it was going to be a rigged election. But you were the president. You were the guy that could have changed that and done stuff about it. And so it just, like I said, it reaffirms my thought that he's a coward. I mean,
well, and this goes back to really kind of what the committee's been trying to get at all along, is to paint the picture that he was leading this insurrection.
yeah.
And so this goes back to that he was angry, that he was trying to get his arm on the steering wheel to get the limo turned around to go to the Capitol, et cetera, et cetera. And I think from day one with the January 6th committee, we've heard them saying these words, is that we're here to show you, or something to this effect, we're here to show you that the President of the United States caused this insurrection and was behind all of it. And, you know, you talked a minute ago about the weapons piece, and they brought that up, right, to show that or at least testimony said or suggests that he knew there was weapons there, and that people, going beyond the weapons, that people wanted to hurt someone.
Yeah.
And then that's part of the thing with the statement, too, of, well, they're not here to hurt me. Mm-hmm. Right? And so now that has everybody saying, well, if the president knew that, then who did he want him to hurt? I mean, from the testimony the other day, we heard at one point, I think this was between Meadows and Cipollone. Oh, it was. I think Cipollone called Meadows and said, hey, Mark, they're at the Capitol, they being the rioters. Mm-hmm. They are breaking in. You have to do something. And per the testimony, Mark Meadows supposedly says, I know, I know they're here, or there was something to the effect of, they're here, blah, blah. Oh, I know, but I can't stop them. The president thinks they should hang Mike anyway.
Yeah. Well, and that answers the question exactly, like, who were they there to hurt?
And that's kind of why I brought that up, right? But, I mean, if that's true, you have two high-ups around the President of the United States talking about, be nice to stop this insurrection, but might as well let it play out. The president's not going to let us stop it, and he wants Pence hung anyway. I mean, that's kind of where that's pointing.
In all fairness, her emails.
True, yeah.
Yeah. So the second thing I will just say was I actually like wrote it down as soon as I heard it because I thought it was that impactful, was Cassidy Hutchinson saying, as an American, I was disgusted. And I feel like that sentiment should be felt by a far greater portion of our nation.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of people, though, that are seeing it, hearing it, are disgusted. Actually, which is going to segue me into something here, and I'm going into my notes here. Last week, I posed a question to you about if this is moving the needle, meaning the January 6th committee. How impactful is it? Does it really matter in the grand scheme of things? And is it moving the needle? And so, sure enough, I saw a poll this week where they talked about the moving the needle, and I think it went from Some weeks ago, 50% of the population of the 50% felt the president should be charged with a crime, and the poll I saw posted was up to 58%. So it had climbed 8% since the start of the January 6th hearings.
Yeah, and I think when I told you last week that I think it is moving the needle, I used the Quinnipiac polls from the Florida governor's race and the Texas governor's race. And I think it is. I mean, I think people are starting to realize that not just this effort to, like, catch the former president and all of his cronies, basically doing, Watergate times 1,000, but the efforts of the Republican Party as a whole to just undermine the majority of the population, I think that is actually starting to like get into people's heads. Like, people are really starting to wonder why different things, right? Like, why is this Supreme Court look like it's about to undo major parts of our lives if we're in a free country, right? Like, we always talk about it. It's like, it's great to be free, that's what everybody wants to say, like, oh, freedom. And then the Supreme Court, like, blatantly takes away freedoms. Which, are we ready to segue into the Supreme Court stuff? Because I got a lot of shit to say, or do you want to talk about Jan 6 a little bit more?
I had a couple more. I had a couple more things on January 6th before we segue into the Supreme Court. I did want to say, though, I did want to put that out there, though, about the moving the needle, because, I just saw it in a poll and wanted to point it out. I know we had that kind of discussion a little bit last week, but I did want to point that out. A couple more things that I took away from the January 6th. And I don't know how much you saw this, but I saw the other day the clip of Congresswoman Cheney, who was questioning Mike Flynn.
Yeah.
And for our listeners maybe that didn't see the clip, Flynn was sitting there with his attorney, at a remote location, wherever they were doing it over Zoom or something. And she starts asking him some questions. Essentially, they were questions revolving around the January 6th committee, fairly basic questions, or around January 6th, the incident that day. And at the very start, Flynn said, his attorney actually cuts in and says, we need a minute. And they go off air for a minute and a half or so, come back on, only for Flynn to say, I plead the fifth. And then Cheney starts to ask him more questions, and each time he just says the fifth. But what struck me, though, was the final question she asked him. When she asked him, do you believe in the peaceful transition of power? And he looked at the camera and said, the fifth. I found that just the most basic of questions, and the thing about it is, right, is the peaceful transition of power is just kind of one of those basic principles our government is built upon. And
yes.
The fact that he just sat there and said, I plead the fifth, I don't know. I personally found that one disturbing.
Yeah, and the other thing that ties this into me is, like, I think, I could be wrong, but I think Michael Flynn was a 4-star general.
3-star.
3-star?
3-star, yeah.
Okay.
3-star.
So, yeah, I was actually saying that as a joke, but turns out I was wrong. He was a 3-star general. But, like, doesn't the oath, like, when you become an officer, say, like, you would obviously know better than me, but I'm pretty sure you have to affirm to, like, protect, support and defend the Constitution. And here's the thing, is if the words are in there, support and defend, that doesn't even mean, like, while you're in uniform, you have to do that. It's like, you have to support it and defend it, right?
Yeah.
And then our creed, per se, is basically the same thing, says the same thing. So it's not only disturbing that this guy is, like, fallen off the rails and is pleading the fifth to like a question like that, but it's disturbing that dude was in charge of, like, the military.
Yeah, he was very high up in the Army.
Very high up, and so that disturbs me.
And I don't think it was all that many years ago he retired from the Army either. Just a few years, 5-6 years ago, maybe.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, it would have had to have been.
Yeah, actually, probably more than that. I mean, maybe 8-9 years ago, because I guess he was retired when Trump started in office. But
not necessarily, because General Mattis basically did a direct conversion, right? Because they had to waive Mattis's.
They did, but Mattis had been retired for a year or two. I'm just saying, though, if you think about it, I mean, we're going back now. This is what, 2022. Trump ran in 2016.
Yeah,
so.
and we don't need to spin our gears.
No, I know. I'm just saying,
details,
whatever. I think he's been retired less than 10 years, though.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that.
So it wasn't that many years ago. He was leading troops, and a lot of them. So, yeah, I found that disturbing. Do you think Mark Meadows at some point is going to come and be interviewed by the committee?
That was my prediction. So for all of you that don't know, we talk offline, not just on the podcast, but I had predicted Monday when I found out there was going to be an emergency hearing that it was possibly going to be Mark Meadows himself. I'll still give myself a pat on the back. I was close because I got his senior aid,
Sure, yeah.
But it was not Mark Meadows. Do I think so? I'm still going to say yes and hold out some hope.
Okay. I'm uncertain. I wanted to pose that question to you, just to kind of gather your thoughts. If you think Meadows is any closer to going out there,
I think he's definitely closer to going to jail after what we've learned. Yeah. But I don't know if that will happen or if it's necessarily the right thing, even though I kind of believe it is the right thing.
Well, the other day on TV, Joe Scarborough did say that Meadows probably should get himself a really, really good criminal defense attorney.
Yeah.
So, here's something interesting. I'll throw this out at you. Where's Mike Pence? Wouldn't it be... I think Mike Pence should come out and say something. Now, is he going to? No. But,
well, he already kind of did.
But yeah, but wouldn't it be nice to hear him come out and just make a statement? I mean, I don't know. I think he could be... I think it is a moment he could maybe seize. I think we could see more of him. I don't think we will. I'm just saying.
I mean, what really do you expect from the mannequin in chief? The guy's like a stick figure, dude.
But I just think it's a time for Pence, and you hear some people say they think Pence may have aspirations of the White House at some point down the road, right? I think this could be a point where Pence could come out and tell his story more or less.
He was literally a radio show host. I mean.
Again, my 2 cents, right?
Yeah.
I think this would be a time where maybe Mike Pence could come out. Maybe some of his statements could calm down some of the fury, etc. I don't know. Just my gathering my thoughts. I have some thoughts on Mike Pence. One final thing on the January 6th before we segue, though. Not sure if you saw it, but Liz Cheney the other night from the committee, she's obviously in a primary race right now in the state of Wyoming. And it was, I don't know, Wednesday or Thursday night, she was in Sheridan, Wyoming at a debate with some of the challengers that she has. I think their primary's in August. And that was interesting to watch. I mean, because...
Why? Because of Republicans debating?
Well, what was interesting was watching that whole thing unfold. Cheney stood her ground with where she was as her, I forget the name of her primary challenger, basically was attacking her for her involvement in the January 6th committee, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And Cheney at one point looked at her and said, "I'm really wondering right now if my opponent, who's standing up here, actually believes that the president is innocent for everything that happened on January 6th," or something to that effect. I mean, it's not a direct quote, something to that effect. And then Cheney looked at the camera and said, "Actually, I don't think she dares say that because she knows Trump will pull his endorsement."
Yeah.
And then she'll be done. I just found it kind of interesting watching that whole thing. By the way, the day before, Cheney had been at the Ronald Reagan Library out there in California speaking on January 6th in a variety of topics, and she was getting pretty hefty applause out there. So it was just interesting, going from the Ronald Reagan Library, right? This, the heartbeat of the old-fashioned conservative movement, right? And Cheney herself's a pretty conservative woman, and certainly hearing the applause out there, and then watching her a day or two later in her primary, I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, but in all fairness, it was in California, so people can say, I mean, you're more likely to get that kind of reception in California.
It just was I thought it was kind of interesting to see it, to see how Congresswoman Cheney is, fighting this battle, right? And I mean, she knows she's pretty much committing political suicide, at least for the moment. with what she's got going on. But anyway, those were just a couple of things I wanted to throw in there. I think we want to segue into our Supreme Court stuff here.
Yeah, but first, let me just say thanks for all the engagement that we got. So I know we joked about on the first podcast that nobody was actually listening to it, but we have had a fair amount of listenership and some feedback. I got some good text messages and stuff, and Trent from South Carolina texted me. He said it was pretty good. Cameron is more in line with how I see it, but it's good regardless.
Nice to know I have a fan club out there.
Yeah, well, who knows? So I appreciate the feedback, and then also I think you got some as well that you want to read. But before that, hey, please, if you're listening, subscribe. We are going to try and expand, get this up on YouTube. Keep in mind, we still both work full-time jobs, so it's not, this is a hobby, and I go to school as well in my off time, so we're limited on how fast and how much we can do, but we are going to get our social media squared away, and please keep the feedback coming. We love to hear it, and subscribe, and also make sure if you do listen to the very last minute. I know we had an intro and outro that was a little bit long, but we are going to tighten it up for everybody so that you can get through it a little bit quicker, and that way we get credit for the actual listens that we have. What do you got, Cam?
Yeah, here's one. All right, so can't wait for the next one. It sounded so professional, and it felt like I was there with you guys. I was nodding my head to a lot of your points, and I enjoyed the rapport you guys have. Goes on to say, you guys don't have to worry about not having followers. I've already subscribed to your channel, and I'm sure more will too.
Fantastic. So keep it up, and we appreciate it. Now, so we talked about Roe v. Wade last week. The Supreme Court did not stop. What was it? Friday, we got the Kennedy versus Bremerton ruling, I believe it was Friday, about the football coach praying on the field after, which is funny because, the irony of this, people supporting a guy who's kneeling on the football field is not lost with me, right? For a cause, right? Kneeling on the football field for a cause.
Interesting. I wanted to say before we go too much further into the Supreme Court stuff, and we'll get to the issue you just brought up, but I just wanted to say as we go into the Supreme Court, I want to say congratulations to Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Absolutely. Thank you for putting that out there, our newest Supreme Court justice. Now, we can talk about the praying on the field thing a little bit if you want, but I don't want to spend too much time on that because I don't really think that issue matters right now. Why? My biggest thing about that is, why are we focused on this? And I think this is part of the problem with the political environment and our country right now, is that we're focused on a bunch of dumb shit that doesn't need to be focused on, right? We have huge problems in the country, and we're going to, make a football coach praying on a high school football field. And by the way, they told him to stop, and then they fired him for praying? I mean, the dude, you know what his record was last season?
What was it?
Want to take a guess? I'll tell you, they played 10 games. So I'll give you that.
So 0-10?
He was 1-9.
1-9, okay.
So he should have been fired for being a shitty football coach. I mean, realistically,
Now, what we don't know is how long he'd been there. Maybe he's been there for a number of years, and he's had some really good years, and this has just been a off year. I don't know.
So I don't know. I mean, I was going to say I could tell you because that's the area that I live in, but I don't want to necessarily disclose that to all our listeners. But I think most people, all our listeners know me, so it's not going to be disclosing something they don't know anyway. But I live in the area where that ruling was. My address has Bremerton, Washington on it. So I will tell you that I don't know how long he had been there. He's competing with bigger schools in the area and schools that have more money and stuff like that. I mean, that Bremerton High School is not it's not a big high school that has a lot of funding and a lot of
probably honestly doing the best he can with what he's got to work with.
Absolutely, yeah. So
to be fair, I will say, I mean,
again, I just feel right.
Well,
I feel like I could probably, even though I don't know a ton about the nuts and bolts of football, I could probably, with a little bit of like gaming the game acumen, go out there and win more than one game in a season.
Yeah.
I would love to think so.
I'd like to think so too, but till I'm in his shoes, hard to say, right?
Yeah.
Or in any coach's shoes for that matter. I will say
That's based on my experience of watching Rudy a lot. You know,
I will say this. You talk about the ruling. I kind of touched on last week in our podcast. I talked about the separation of church and state. Right now, that I believe that was something pretty big to the founding fathers. They didn't want to lock us into any one religion, but at the same time, they also pointed out that America is a country for freedom of religion. Mm-hmm. And so I've never had an issue with somebody publicly praying. I mean, I don't have an issue with that. I really don't. I mean, was he in the classroom forcing an entire group of students to pray? It doesn't sound like he's out praying on a football field. And I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was voluntary, right? I mean, if students wanted to join him, they could.
that's true, but that doesn't mean that if you're on the football team, if you're a player on the football team, you feel compelled to join because of maybe your place on the team. Now, again,
maybe, but
let me I'm just going to put a stop to us talking about this. I don't want to talk about this ruling anymore because, frankly, I think it got way more news, and there's two other, critical rulings that I want to talk about. So I'm just going to say this is not the shit we need to be worrying about right now.
Well, and that's kind of why I was saying.
Yeah.
I don't think it's that big of a deal, and I don't think that many people are that heartbroken about it. I will say this, though. If you're saying that's okay to do that, you should be... I mean, people should be allowed to pray however they would want to out there, right? Whether that be whatever, a religion that isn't the mainstream.
Yeah, a buddy of mine that is a teacher basically said, well, great, now I can host a voluntary Satan worshiping,
I mean, theoretically, right? I mean, that's kind of what that's saying, so...
Yeah.
I mean, I just want to throw that out there, right? That, I mean, you should be prepared to allow people of any religion to practice.
Okay, I'm already moving on. I'm sick of talking about it. And I'm sick of the fact that...
we're giving it more airtime?
Yeah, that we're giving it more airtime, and it got way more than other decisions. So...
All right, what's the next one you want to talk about then?
Do you know about the EPA decision?
Heard about it. I mean, I didn't dive terribly deep into it, but I mean, yes, I'm aware that decision came out, and I know it's been talked about. What are your thoughts on it?
I think it's extremely scary and dangerous, and not just because I think we should prepare the environment to be a hospitable place for our kids, but I'm really worried that. Yes, not only are we damaging the shit out of the environment, whether you believe it or not, whatever the case is, this is scary because it applies to the EPA. The second thing is, and granted, I'm not a lawyer, I don't have a law degree, I've taken a college class about law, but that's about it. But they used this thing called the Major Questions Doctrine, and this doctrine basically allows... It basically says that if it's not explicitly stated by Congress what the organization or the regulatory authority has the power to do, then they don't have the power to do it. And so Congress basically passes a law to put in these regulatory authorities, right? And the most recent example I can think of is allowing the Dodd-Frank legislation, which allowed the Federal Trade Commission to heavily regulate banks, because they basically screwed up the entire country in 2008. And so it's basically saying that unless Congress specifically gives you the power to regulate something, you don't have the power to regulate it. Which Congress is saying, we don't know what we don't know. We're making a regulatory authority. Now you have the power to do this. Now let me give it to you like this. If I'm an employee at NBC and I want to show a video from Pornhub after my news broadcast at 5 o'clock, who's going to stop me? I mean, is the FCC the regulatory authority for TV and rating movies and radio and all those things? Is the FCC going to stop me now?
I mean, you would think, but...
Well, they can't now because it's not explicitly stated.
Yeah.
And so I think this went way under the radar, and it was mostly posed as an environmental issue. This is not an environmental issue. This is an issue of what do regulatory authorities? Let me ask you this: what does what is OSHA able to do? Does this mean that Jeff Bezos in his Amazon shipping stations can basically say I don't have to pay for air conditioning, or I don't have to have
Because it's
accommodations
not-
for, you know what I mean? Because now OSHA could be basically rendered pointless. They could basically be taken out of the game. How about the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission?
Go ahead on that one.
I'm just saying, the Supreme Court basically just said that regulatory authorities that are set up by the government
Right.
cannot necessarily regulate what the things that they're supposed to regulate. So this means that unfair practices, right? This means the whole hey, Congress people shouldn't be trading stocks that they might have knowledge about, or other inside traders of stocks and things like that. I mean, this is dangerous from the environmental perspective, but I think this is hugely dangerous from a what government can and can't do. And the last one I want to bring up is the Attorney General. This is so damaging to the people that regulate government officials and people that work for the government from doing the wrong thing. I mean, your thoughts?
I mean, and kind of spelled out. I mean, going back to the environmental one, I saw that as, or the EPA one. What I saw of it was definitely on the side of the environmental, right?
Mm-hmm.
I haven't. I mean, you've dug in it more, I think, than a lot of people are putting it on TV. When you kind of talk about the nuts and bolts in it, you've gone a lot further than most. Because honestly, that's what as I was read about it, the ruling, and then saw it on TV, etc., that everybody was kind of drilling down to the environmental piece and talking about, how, it could potentially damage the environment going forward, etc., etc. So you bring up a side to it that I think a lot of people aren't thinking of.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I wanted to do, because I read into it a lot because I think it's interesting, but I think that this Supreme Court, it just goes to show that this Supreme Court is actually causing more damage than most people realize right now.
Well, now, to be fair, it depends on what side of the aisle you're on, right? There are certainly people in the country, I mean, the Supreme Court, well, beyond the Supreme Court, right? The country's very divided at the moment. We all know that, right? Pretty split country. I say split, but you got a divided country. You've got people, one side of the aisle's cheering what the Supreme Court's doing, right? And
Yeah,
then
but
the
I
other
don't
side,
think that. I think they're cheering because they don't understand the
well,
implications.
so it could be, but I'm just saying. Right now, you certainly have a number of people cheering, and then you have a number of people not cheering. Right?
Yeah, do you think all the people that are cheering the Roe v. Wade decision would be okay if I played a 30-minute Pornhub broadcast on NBC after the news?
No, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, that's what I'm saying, right?
But that's precedent now that is
Yeah.
set, that we, apparently, well, I used to think precedent was very hard to undo, but apparently that doesn't apply anymore either.
It'll be interesting, right, seeing the issues unfold with the Supreme Court, what they take up here later when they come back in session, seeing how they play out in through the summer, going into the fall, right? I mean, do we see, and let's just play this out, do we see something, big things come out? I'm not exactly sure how their sessions are timed, but do we see some big ones come out shortly before the midterm elections? I mean, and I say big things, big rulings or whatever.
I think
come out
arguably the biggest ruling that they got to in this last session, nobody knows about. I mean, and when I say nobody, obviously it's not nobody because I was able to Google it and read about it. But one that flew completely under the radar that is super scary, unless you're like a Jan 6 denier and still think Trump is president. I guess then you're probably okay with it. But I think this arguably the scariest ruling that they had went completely unreported, and that was Moore versus Harper. And do you know anything? Have you even heard about this case?
I have not been following that one.
Yeah, so this is one of my surprises for you, that I was going to prepare to talk about this, and I wasn't going to tell you in advance so that I could try and catch you off guard. But Moore versus Harper uses this independent state legislature doctrine. Mm-hmm. So it goes back to the states should be able to kind of do what they want, right? So this thing basically it hinders some people's ability to regulate legislative authority. And so this basically means that like state legislatures can do whatever they want without necessarily like the government or the attorney general of a state interfering. And so this is bad for gerrymandering. And I don't care which side you're on, gerrymandering is bad. Gerrymandering is bad for Democrats and Republican states, and gerrymandering is bad for Republicans and Democratic states.
Yeah, I mean, we've
Right?
seen that over time. Yeah.
And this is like, this basically allows a governor to just toss votes because whatever, And so I think that arguably this may be one of the worst decisions, not necessarily from a legal standpoint because I'm not that kind of mind and I don't understand it all that well, but it's really bad from a we the people kind of point of view.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that one up. That's not one I'd really been following. Kind of like you. I mean, I don't sit and analyze these things on how the laws are necessarily because again, I'm not a lawyer. Like you said earlier that you're not either. But I mean, you look at certainly that one has implications for people. We talked about the EPA one. I mean, last week we spent a good 20 minutes talking about how the Roe v. Wade thing is impacting people. At the end of the day, regardless of what side of the aisle you are on, people are paying attention to the Supreme Court now. And, I mean, in some ways, people can look at it and say, hey, it's a good thing. People are getting more civic-minded. But I think a lot of it is people, well, I'll take the Roe v. Wade one, for example. People knew that one was coming, or the majority of people did, right? I mean, people that were paying attention to the news, like, most of the country knew it was coming based on the leak, right, back in May.
Yeah.
But I think, people really sat up and took notice when it officially came out, the ruling. And, I mean, not to go back in and, spend an all afternoon talking about that one again. I mean, we talked about it extensively last week. But for example, right, I think these big decisions are catching people. Certainly the Roe v. Wade one has stirred a lot of emotions on both sides of that issue. But some of these other ones are stirring emotions as well. And like I said, it's going to be interesting to see how things go forward. But as we talked about, the court itself, not going to change anytime soon, right? And so, and interestingly enough, right, as we head into the midterms, Mitch McConnell has all but said, hey, if we take the Senate, and if something happens to a justice and Biden has to nominate one, don't expect me to give him a hearing.
Yeah,
so he's come out and said that, right? I was actually watching. So there was a discussion the other night about the Supreme Court, and I was watching it unfold. And Democrats are beside themselves right now for what they're calling mismanagement of the Supreme Court. Now, I guess you could argue, and I guess it's true, right? They didn't really mismanage the whole Merrick Garland thing. That was McConnell saying, I'm not giving him a hearing. But there are a number of Democrats right now that are saying, why didn't somebody in the Democratic Party or a group of people put pressure on Ruth Bader Ginsburg to retire during the Obama years? And that's a thing they're discussing about now, right? And so, they're looking, and it's easy to call them sore loser, call them whatever, but it's easy to sit back and say, hey man, coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Well, it's also easy to say that in an environment where we lost the election and still won by 3 million votes.
Well, so
right, like as a Democrat, right, and I hear this from my parents all the time, is they're like mad at Bernie for ruining Hillary's shit, but Hillary won the popular vote by 3 million votes.
Well, so
and that whole electoral college, and the reason why those decisions fall out the way they do, is like impacted even more because of this Moore v. Harper ruling.
So
right, so the people's vote has less power today than it did 2 weeks ago.
Well,
2 weeks ago they didn't have enough power to get the job done.
But going back though, it's interesting, right? Listening to some of these Democratic strategists talk about it, and I think they're right though. We can kind of segue this from the court into just a general running, right? The Republicans have done a good job of uniting around issues. They have. I mean, the last 40 years, that's been not all Republicans, but a number of them have rallied around Roe v. Wade. They got it done.
Yeah, but the Republicans started Roe v. Wade. I mean, it's so stupid. It's
I get it, and it's interestingly enough, right? You look at the hypocrisy behind some of it. I saw like one of the leaders of the Southern Baptist Church, right after the Roe v. Wade ruling came out in 1973, shortly thereafter, this gentleman in 73 said, "Good, that's great news for women in this country. I've always believed life started at birth." Interestingly enough, right? Well, the whole Roe v. Wade thing, though. You know, in the 1970s when that went down, there wasn't much said about it. It became when it became an issue was in 1979 when Reagan was running.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there was a number of things, right? But remember, Reagan wants to come in from the tumultuous 70s, right? Or I say come in, right? The tumultuous 70s are ending, and he wants to start that new decade strong. And he's running for president. He wants to paint a picture of that just blue collar ultimate American, right? Shouldn't just say blue collar, white collar, the American, right? The American spirit, right? And so behind that kind of came this whole. And his advisors talked to him about, hey, guns is an issue with people. We can make this abortion thing an issue. Let's make it a religious thing. And next thing you know, boom, here you go.
Yeah, but this is my problem with the modern Republican Party, right? It goes back to my whole thing on the football coach, right? Like, why are we so concerned with this right now? We've got serious problems in the country, yet one party, and granted, you're right, they did a really good job of making these issues.
Did a great job of it.
The only thing they want to talk about is guns and abortion.
Well,
like, I don't want to talk about guns and abortion. Guess what I want to talk about? I want to talk about, like, making our education system better so that my daughter gets a good education, right? And I want to talk about, lifting people out of poverty by making the economy as a whole. Or, like, why do I feel like I have to work a 40-hour work job and, like, be all stressed out just to live my life and not have any real benefits, right? Because a majority of America, they work crazy time, like, with no benefits. It's like I heard this guy from England be like, he said he thought Americans were like ignorant and they refused to travel the world because they were so, like, crazy. And then he's like, when I moved to America, I finally realized that Americans just aren't afforded vacation time a lot of times.
So, but going back to what I was saying earlier, those are issues, right, wrong, or indifferent. And I've said it too. I get sick of hearing the social issues and want to hear more about meat and potatoes. I've said that for a long time. But these are issues that both sides have drummed up, right? And both sides have got their bases going on social issues. But again, going back to the Republicans have bought it and they have sold that brand, right? They bought into it and they've sold it. And so, right, and that's the thing with it. I look at the Democrats and I say, what are you running on? Right? I mean, I remember back in the 90s.
But here's the thing, they're running on all the nonsense that's not guns and abortion.
But remember in the 90s, right, when James Carville came out and told Bill Clinton it's the economy, stupid, right? Talk about putting money in people's pockets.
Yeah.
And that's the thing right now. And that's going into the midterms, right? And I'm going to talk about that in a minute, right? I mean, the deck is stacked for the Republicans.
I mean, you said it last week, yeah. The inflation and gas prices is perfect for the Republicans.
That's what I'm saying. The deck is stacked now, and I'm going to we'll talk about this in a couple minutes, but there are some issues that are maybe driving it the other way, but yeah, the deck is stacked. And I will tell you, the Democrats need to figure out, like, if they want to, be a true force right now in the upcoming elections, I mean, they're going to have to figure out what they're going to rally behind. Now, the Supreme Court probably gave them something with the Roe v. Wade, so, but yeah, they have got it. They're going to have to figure that out. The Republicans know what they need to run on. I don't know that the Democrats are organized and ready to fight.
Yeah.
I don't see it. The Republicans have fought. They fought hard for a number of years. They're ready to fight again. I don't know if the Democrats are ready to rise to the challenge. The Democrats, one of the problems they have is this big tent party. And maybe that's not a problem, but the thing is, when they try and rally, they've got a lot of different factions of the Democratic Party. It can go from Joe Manchin on one side to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on the other, right? And I've said for a long time, take a guy like Joe Manchin, or even Senator John Tester from Montana, who's a farmer from Montana, who gets elected as a Democratic senator from Montana, right? Joe Manchin is getting elected in West Virginia as a Democrat. Tester in Montana as a Democrat. How are these guys doing it? And you know what? I always hear the Democrats say, we want to take back these working class voters that have gone to Trump, right? That we had back in the 70s, right? And they've jumped ship. They jumped ship to Reagan and they've jumped ship to Trump. Like, how do we bring them back? Why don't you get involved? Get Joe Manchin. Get an issue that he's passionate about and run with him. Get him out on the forefront. Get Tester out on the forefront, right? I really think that is something that they are just lacking that they're doing. I think they've got the pieces there. They're just not putting them together.
Yeah, I'm going to agree to disagree with you on this one. And that's not normally the stance I take because I'd rather argue with you and be adamant in my position. But I'll politely engage in civil discourse with this one. So I disagree. I think the underground movements, the underground movements that are now coming to the surface are making a big impact. And I will tell you by example, Raphael Warnock. Right? So I think that there are a lot of movements that are going on the democracy side, like big D democracy, that are coming to fruition. And I think the Republicans are only hurting their chances with the Supreme Court and with the lack of legislating, right? Because guess who's at fault for Biden not getting stuff done? I mean, I see all these people on Facebook, they're like, oh, Biden isn't doing shit, but guess whose problem that is? That's a Republican problem.
Well,
they're not allowing him to make progress. And call it what you will, but, people were really upset about the Affordable Health Care Act when it passed because they didn't like President Obama or whatever reason. But now it's overwhelmingly popular in the United States because guess what? People have health care that they didn't have.
So,
you want your bridges and roads fixed? Call your Republican congressman and tell them to like, hey, dummy, this Build Back Better thing is not so bad for Americans.
Well, it's interesting. So you talk about the roads and bridges. That was, again, I was talking about Manchin earlier, but that was one of his big things, right? The bipartisan infrastructure bill, which I think a lot of people were behind.
Yeah.
But I will say this, right? I mean, you talk about the Affordable Care Act, right? Maybe that's something the Democrats run behind. Because all these Democrats that I mentioned earlier, even the moderates, seem to be behind the Affordable Care Act, right? They have to unify them with these issues. I'll say this right now. The Democrats want to win in 2024. Run Joe Manchin. He'd win.
Yeah.
He'd win. But the Democrats aren't going to put him out there. And to be fair, I don't know that Senator Manchin wants to run. I mean, I have no idea.
I wouldn't vote for him.
Now
I wouldn't vote for him as a Democrat.
I think a lot of the country would. He would get a lot of crossover votes.
If he ran against Liz Cheney, I would vote Cheney.
That'd be an interesting race, wouldn't it? Manchin against Cheney in 2024.
If you say interesting race, I think that's like dystopian vision of America. Like that's like how bad has it gotten that's our presidential race.
I think, but what I'm getting at with Manchin or somebody like Manchin, again, I'll go back to John Tester out of Montana, right? And again, I don't think Senator Tester has any desire to run for president. He's a farmer back in Montana, all that. But I will tell you, that's how they win. They get the crossover votes.
No, I don't. Okay, we're gonna jump back in time to last week. Fuck the middle. The middle is not doing anything productive for the United States.
Disagree.
What has the middle done that's productive?
The middle is out there as the voice of reason.
What has the middle done that's productive?
Voice of reason. The middle is this.
The voice of reason doesn't get elected.
So
and if they
some
do,
of that is the primary.
And if the middle gets elected, guess what happens? Congress divided stops anything from happening other than one bipartisan infrastructure bill.
So I was going to say though, if you look at the middle though, that is where you do get your bills done, right? Bipartisan infrastructure bill. There are, and again, now this isn't. I'm not aware of any bipartisan support on this, but Manchin now apparently is in talks again with Schumer to try and get some faction of Build Back Better. Actually, I think Biden is talking directly to Manchin about that. But it's that middle ground you've got to take to get things done. And The hard thing, though, the hard thing about it,
hold
the
on.
hard thing is that, hang on, you got people on the far right and the far left that are loud, right? They're the ones that are getting the cable news anchors behind them and all that. But I'm here to say, and interestingly enough, a listener reached out to me too and said, "Hey, I agree with your stance about the middle." But besides all that, it is that middle ground where most people in this country are. I stand by that.
Okay, that's fine. Real quick, let me just say that because we're almost at an hour, let's segue into not governor's races. Let's segue into finishing this conversation, and we'll get to governor's races next week. Are you down with that?
Oh, wow.
Can we postpone governor's races?
Have we gone that long? Yeah.
Yeah, we're at 55 minutes. So can you postpone governor's races so I can bitch about the middle, and this will give me more time to do my research as well.
Can I talk about one governor race?
No, go ahead. I'm just joking.
Yeah, let me. Well, I'll let you certainly say your last little bit. I'll talk about one big governor race that I'm prepared to talk about, just because it was kind of in the news this week, and then we'll, or it wasn't really in the news, but it was interesting.
Well, the reason I don't want to get too into that is because I want to spend the remaining time that we have on the middle, because
Okay.
I got a couple questions for you. Mm-hmm. What does the middle believe that's different from my leftist radical opinion? Can you give me an example?
Are you talking about the middle itself? So, what does the middle believe? I mean, here's
what is an issue that you in the middle disagree with me on as a radical leftist?
such as, I mean, what's
issue? Go ahead. Any issue?
So I will tell you, I think the middle is more in line with, at the end of the day, they just want to have food on their table.
I want to have food on my table.
They want to have fair prices. They are tired of paying $5 a gallon
Okay, but
gas.
that's really not that much of a political issue.
What? Pricing? I'm talking about how middle of the road people, though. They want a fair price on things.
I mean, look. Yeah, I want to pay $2 a gallon for gas. Is that actually a political issue? I don't think it is, because I'll tell you what. Guess what?
But
The
to be
Supreme
fair, though,
Court-
people are going to make it that.
Well, they will make it that,
People
but it's not a
make it that.
political issue. It's an economic issue. And if it delves into politics, let's delve into the Supreme Court just took away the EPA's right to regulate fuel companies like oil, gas, all those companies. So guess what they're going to do? Less of what makes the average person happy. Right?
Well, but going back to what you said earlier about the issue with the fuel and going back to...
Well, we don't have to spin our
prices.
wheels. I just want one issue that the middle...
Oh, I'm giving it to you, the middle. I mean, at the end of the day...
No, but you just keep saying the middle. I'm saying, look, I'm coming at this from the radical left point. I'm not against all guns. I'm just against some. And I think you should have to, maybe re-up your registration every year like you have to do for a car. Is that reasonable? Do most people in the middle agree with that?
Well, I think a lot in the middle do, right? And that's kind of where I'm getting at.
But that's what I'm saying. So what's the difference? This is why I don't believe in the middle, because I don't think the middle is in the middle.
I think the middle is. I do. I think the middle is, and I think at the end of the day, the middle doesn't want to go extreme to one side or the other. And I think you could make the argument that you're probably more in the middle as well, honestly.
Okay, now then let me rephrase the question this way. What does the radical left want that you don't?
That I don't, or
Yeah.
that the middle doesn't
No,
want?
if you're in the middle, or that the middle doesn't want, but you, what does the radical left want that you don't?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that people look at with the radical left, or that they fear with the radical left, right, is that they're pushing the country to an extreme. You always hear the communism, the socialism, and I think that's probably the big...
But I don't think they are. I think that's just a story that somebody's telling you. Because, I'm a radical leftist. Guess what? I don't want communism because I know enough about economics to know that it doesn't work.
Been proven time and time again.
Yeah. Do I want some form of socialism? Yeah, probably. But what? Here's the thing. When people on whatever side of the spectrum say we don't want socialism because of Venezuela, it's not the socialism wasn't Venezuela's problems. The autocratic governor or the autocratic government in Venezuela was the problem, right? Because yes, they were socialist, but they also basically had a dictator that could do whatever he wanted, and he screwed the country.
Well, certainly down there, yeah.
Right.
But,
So give me an example where Sweden really sucks because of socialism.
well, people are going to talk. Well, I mean, if you want to talk about the Nordic countries, people are going to complain about the high taxes that they pay.
Yeah,
And
but guess what? They also make a ton of money.
So again,
and they're equitable.
Again, though, America isn't set up right now to live like the Nordic countries.
Agreed.
I mean, we just aren't.
Okay,
right?
I agreed, but you're telling me, so again, what does the radical left want that you don't? It's not, we don't want communism.
Yeah, but I will tell you, I think they're pushing the envelope on a lot of socialist type issues. I think the middle ground, what you tend to see on the far right and the far left is they're going to push the issue as far as they can. And I think the middle ground doesn't want it pushed that far. I think they want stability, for lack of a better word.
But I feel like this is like they're coming to take your guns away. Nobody has ever tried to come take your guns away. I don't want people to go take your guns away, right? I want the government to pay, buy back your AR-15s, because I think that we shouldn't have that kind of a weapon. And if you're using it to hunt a pig or a deer or whatever that guy from Mississippi said, like wild pig hunting, if you're using an AR-15 for that, you're a shitty shot.
So I know actually why they use them on the hogs. They want the higher capacity magazine because sometimes they'll have like 30 of them out in the field, and that's the argument there. I can tell you that's why people like that particular weapon. When you talk about the hog or the pig hunting, now deer, you're not going to be shooting at 30 deer at a time, but that is the big argument there with the pigs. You talk about gun confiscation, right? You could make the argument there are people on the far left that would like that. Right, I've heard Beto O'Rourke say, "I want to go confiscate guns," and that, in and of itself, right? When people start making statements like that, that's what gets people in the middle. There are people in the middle that are going to sit there and say, "Hey, I'm okay with gun control to an extent, right? I'm okay with the background checks and such like that." But you start talking about now entering somebody's home, and that may be kind of extreme.
That's not even a thing.
But hear me out.
That's not even a thing.
Hear me out. They hear confiscation. Immediately they picture that. Now, does confiscation necessarily mean kicking your door in? No. But these are the kind of things, right, that people consider extreme. Hey, I'm not for the confiscation. I'm not for pushing the envelope on some of these things. People in the middle, I would say they want a good environment, but they're not ready to end all fossil fuel consumption tomorrow.
I'm not trying to.
Not ready to end it in
I don't want to end all fossil fuel tomorrow. I just want to make progress.
But this is where I'm saying, I think, and you hear these extremes, or on the flip side, right, you go to the other side and people look at it in the middle and say, hey, I'm not sure I just want unregulated militias roaming the countryside, enforcing their will upon people, right? I mean, I think you could say somebody in the middle just wants, again, stability. And I will tell you that there are a lot of people in this country that identify as middle.
Yeah.
The problem is their voices just aren't heard because it's the loudness on both sides that are screaming so loud.
Well, and it's just like I said last week. We're not Canada, right? The middle doesn't work for us because we are so divided. I just don't think that the middle is actually that much of the middle. I think they're vastly farther left on the political spectrum that we have right now in this country than they think they are, or than you think they are.
Well, I think a lot of people I think a lot of people would disagree with that, saying that they want to be in the middle.
Yeah.
And so that's where I see that. And again, I think if the Democrats could package their message with some of their more middle, whether they're middle or not, people consider them middle candidates and try and bring their party together under a tent, is what I'm trying to get at. They would up their odds of winning. Again, easier said than done, but I think if they could find a true moderate candidate to run in 2024, that's assuming Biden doesn't run again. That's assuming he doesn't run again.
Who's more moderate than Biden?
Joe Manchin.
Okay, well...
John Tester.
I'll agree to disagree. I'm going to throw in the flag. I don't think... I think Joe Manchin is a turncoat. I don't think he's a moderate.
Manchin's an old school Democrat. And I think somebody asked me.
Well, so is Biden. I mean.
Oh, okay. You could argue that. Somebody asked me though.
Why Biden was like John McCain's best friend.
Sure, they were friends. They were also both members of the Senate when it was much more civil to be in the Senate.
Yeah.
But I will tell you from the standpoint of like Manchin. Somebody asked me one day recently, I don't know, last week or two. They're like, "Why is he a Democrat?" And I said, honestly, I think a lot of it is he had a lot of respect for Robert Byrd, right? A longtime senator from West Virginia. And he did. And he still says it to this day. Byrd had a lot of influence on him. And so I think that has influenced him a lot. He also has said that he still believes in the working class in this country. He's big on that Affordable Care Act.
I know, like from his yacht, saying I believe in,
That's every senator, though.
Yeah, I know.
That really is. But that's where I'm getting at with that. I think he's more of a Democrat than people realize. But again, we as a country, right, everybody seems to focus in on a social issue or two here and there, and they want to label people this, that, and the other. All I'm saying is this. He's got a D next to his name. He continues to keep that D there. And I really believe if he ran, he's not going to. We know he's not going to.
Yeah.
But let's just say he did. Let's say in 2024, Biden says, I'm not going to run. And let's say Manchin did run. Manchin would probably win. Now, it depends, I suppose, who's up there against him. But what Manchin would do, he's got a number of independents and moderate Republicans that like the guy, and I think he would win. I really do.
I think,
but the Democrats won't put him up, and
think
I don't think he wants to run.
I think if Joe Manchin ran in 2024, he'd get primaried by Howard Stern.
Well, that's the other
who
problem.
Also announced that he was running. I don't think it's serious at all, but
you say that. I mean, Donald Trump we didn't think was serious when he announced he was running either.
Well, yeah, but here's the thing: Howard Stern ran for governor of New York. I think it was governor or mayor of New York City or something like that.
A long time ago.
But he dropped out of the race, I think, as soon as he built up traction and realized people would actually vote for him. So he did, come out this week and say, I'm going to run, and Bradley Cooper as his vice president, which is funny, but I think it's a joke.
Here's the problem, though. Whether it's Manchin or any moderate, it's almost impossible to win a primary now for a moderate. You are going to, the further left or right that you can push a candidate in these primaries, that's effect. We don't see many moderate candidates making it through the primaries now. So that's an interesting point you bring up about him getting primaried, because that's why I say it would be that's why I say the Democrats would never put him up.
Okay, I'll again disagree with you on that one, but I think as it is just over an hour, let's postpone governor's races to next week. And we'll get to closing remarks. What do you want to wrap it up and end on? Anything? I know you're going to say governor's races, but...
Well, I will... Okay. So, I think a lot of good discussion today.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
I've got a whole... And I will say this, right? I've got a whole list of governor's races that I promise we will get to next week. Because there are some really interesting ones, and actually...
The great thing is the government's effectively on vacation. So next week we may be able to do a whole episode about governor's races.
Yeah, I will. Well, some of them could probably eat that up. I will say, though, there are some... I will say to our listeners, take a peek at some of these governor races, because they are interesting. Some of them are more competitive kind of than I even thought they were going to be.
I thought we were wrapping this up. I'm just joking.
Yeah. Well, I'm laying the foundation for next week. Right, but I will say though that take a look at some of these governor's races. They are really interesting. There's an interesting one in Arizona right now that I can't wait to talk about next week. Here's what I will say though to people that are out there, to our listeners: please continue to listen and continue to shoot us information or shoot us emails, texts, etc. on what you think, regardless of where you sit on the political aisle. You send us something, I think we'll be happy to talk about it. And again, from what I'm gathering and the people that I have seen the messages and stuff coming from, it looks like we've got folks that are kind of sitting out there on all different sides of the aisle. And that's good to hear. And you can hear us as we talk. We don't always agree or disagree, or we don't always agree on things. Some things we do, but we certainly disagree plenty. But what you haven't seen is screaming. We're not shouting at one another. We're not hitting each other over the head. And so I think there's a message there, right?
Legitimate political discourse, right?
But there's a message here, right? That you can see how the conversation flows. We can talk about issues, but yet at the same time, certainly get along and do it in a civil manner. And again, I will say this. the country as a whole needs to learn how to do that.
Absolutely, and I appreciate all the feedback that you, our listeners, have given us. We will continue to engage as long as we're getting the engagement, because otherwise we don't really have much to do. We'll just be talking to nobody. But I did want to highlight, Cam, I got a message from Kavanaugh from Kansas. He said, enjoyed the new podcast. I also have recommended it. Sounds good. And then told me that he told his wife that he's argued with me before, and it's impossible. So hats off to your opponent for even getting in the ring. So I appreciate that, and that's another yet. So all my feedback apparently is for you.
I must have
positive.
a small fan club out there, and that's good to know, I guess, right?
All of my friends, yeah.
I've got a small fan club going, I guess. I
Yeah.
don't know. Maybe we need to get some merchandise or something.
The
to start
best,
handing out.
yeah, the best was like the sailor that has worked for both of us at one point in time, telling us it was good enough, good to hear us talk about something other than work.
Than his performance?
Than his job and his performance, yeah.
I will say, so something else too for our listeners, one thing that we have talked about and that we're going to be getting at in the coming weeks. We're not ready to do it next week yet, but we do have a couple of folks that we are looking at doing some interviews on.
Absolutely.
So certainly stay tuned for that in the coming weeks, because we are preparing those as we speak. Actually, there's been some emails kind of going back and forth and such. So we've got some folks that we want to get on here to join us, an interview or two with some folks in the political arena that are it's going to be fun. And, who knows? At some point, I told you recently, I'm shooting for the stars. I keep hoping Rand Paul or somebody will just come on the show here. We've got a list of our folks we want to get on. I don't know. We talked all about Joe Manchin today. I'm sure he's listening. Maybe Manchin will come on.
Not Justice Thomas. But we will...
Shockingly, he has not reached out yet. Last
Yeah.
week, we put a call out. But.
Yeah, and we've got some ideas for some episodes dedicated to one specific topic that I want to get through. I mean, I want to talk a little bit about constitutional amendments. I could do a whole probably hour on that.
We had the
along with
school.
you.
We had the public school thing.
Yeah,
we're going to talk about.
Public school thing I want to talk about, and then I also want to do a whole probably we could do 3 weeks on the labor movement. I've got enough to talk about that for a lot. But I think for this episode we'll go ahead and call it here. Cam, thanks so much. I appreciate it, and thank you again to our listeners. We'll be back next week.
See you later.